David Cameron will urge the Sri Lankan government to investigate allegations of war crimes and human rights abuses when he goes to a Commonwealth meeting in the country next week. Slapping the wrists of his hosts may sting, but many Tamils here are deeply disappointed that the Prime Minister is going at all. They wanted him to boycott the meeting altogether. In a moment, we'll ask the Foreign Secretary why the government is going and what it hopes to achieve. But first, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller reports on the pressure on the government here ahead of next week's meeting.
David Cameron! David Cameron! Don't go to Sri Lanka!
Their message is forthright.
David Cameron! David Cameron! Don't go to Sri Lanka!
With the Commonwealth Summit just over a week away, Tamils in Britain are still begging David Cameron not to honour a regime accused of war crimes by gracing it with his presence. The reality is, though, that Britain is going. The government insists that the summit will shed a spotlight on Sri Lanka and that by attending, the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary would be able to gauge things at first hand. The question in these people's minds, though, just how much noise will David Cameron really make?
David Cameron! David Cameron! Don't go to Sri Lanka!
4.5 years have elapsed since the end of the 27-year-long civil war. The Tamil Tiger insurgents were accused of war crimes and banned as a terrorist organisation in Britain. But it was the brutality of Sri Lankan government forces at the end of the conflict that has drawn the deepest concern. A UN report said at least 40,000, mostly Tamil civilians, were indiscriminately killed in the final few months. Other estimates suggest that the number may have been much higher. The allegations of war crimes go right to the top, to the man David Cameron will shake hands with next week, Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa, and to his brother Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the Defence Secretary. Sri Lankan Tamils resident in Britain say they're sickened by this and came to Downing Street this afternoon to press their point home. They entered still hoping for a last-minute boycott. But Downing Street is giving no indication of an 11th-hour change of heart. The British government believes boycotts don't work, engagement's the word, and saying something forceful while there. Tamil groups think that even the act of going there is to reward a pariah regime. They emerged after 40 minutes with the Prime Minister. Do you still feel that Britain is collaborating with this regime?
I do feel that the step that we've taken is engagement, which is the same as collaborating with this regime.
The biggest point, I think, is he said he will call for an independent international investigation for the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity.
But that's not Downing Street's version. For Tamils, the international bit is pretty crucial. Tonight, though, when we called Number 10 for a clarification, they said David Cameron hadn't actually meant a full international war crimes inquiry, but a Sri Lankan-led independent inquiry. The opposition here say British government policy is a shambles.
Inexplicably, more than 6 months before this summit was due to take place, the Prime Minister confirmed that he and the Foreign Secretary, William Hague, would be attending that summit. That simply doesn't make sense to me when there was a real opportunity in these critical months to bring pressure leverage to bear on the Sri Lankan government to meet its obligations under international law in relation to what is still a very serious human rights situation in the country.
The Conservative-led coalition has pursued a policy of engagement with Sri Lanka for 3 years, believing it would yield results, but it hasn't. The UN and all leading international human rights groups note a steady deterioration and growing authoritarianism. Dissent, they say, has been criminalised, forced disappearances are common, and torture is widespread. This Tamil man was tortured in Sri Lanka this year. He'd studied in Britain for years and went home to see his ageing parents. He claims he was arrested at the airport on arrival and interrogated and tortured for 5 days by security forces wielding assault rifles, electric cables, barbed wire and wooden rods.
I thought I would never be set free. I told myself that this was going to be the last chapter of my life. I deeply regret the British Prime Minister's decision to visit Sri Lanka. Instead of punishing this government and its leaders, Britain is honouring them by visiting. We Tamils have no option but to helplessly watch this sad event. It is deeply regrettable.
Sri Lanka's Tamil minority are looking to Britain's Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary to publicly stand up against their autocratic regime. Most now suspect their expectations are unrealistic.